Welcome to Crimson Clues, where shadows hide secrets and silence reveals the truth. Every story is a puzzle, and every clue takes you closer to the answer. Subscribe now, join the hunt, and let the mystery begin. Chapter 1. I arrived at Kensington Palace on a crisp afternoon in May 1935, the very height of London's social season. The palace loomed before me, a stately pile of red brick, its Georgian symmetry softened by Victorian flourishes, the gardens stretched out in orderly splendor, their hedges clipped with military precision, though a faint mist hung about, giving the scene an almost theatrical air. It was, I thought, precisely the sort of place where one might expect grand events, and as I would soon discover, grand mysteries. The invitation had come from Prince George, Duke of Kent, a man whose stern reputation preceded him like a royal decree. I confess I was rather flattered, though I suspected the real reason lay in my association with Hercule. Poirot's fame as a detective had a way of opening doors, even those as gilded as Kensington Palaces. A footman in immaculate livery ushered me through the entrance hall, a vast space of polished marble and soaring ceilings, portraits of long dead. Royals gazed down with imperious eyes, and the air carried the delicate scent of roses, no doubt arranged by some unseen hand. I was shown to a suite overlooking the gardens, where I tidied myself before joining the other guests in the drawing room. There I first encountered our hosts. Prince George stood by the fireplace, tall and balding, his bearing as rigid as a guardsman's. His stern features softened only when he glanced at his wife. Princess Marina, she was a vision, dark hair swept up elegantly, her silk gown catching the light with every graceful step. Her beauty was matched only by her extravagance, a quality that seemed to sparkle as brightly as the jewels she so favored. A firm handshake was given by Prince George, who added, "Captain Hastings, a pleasure to have you with us." "It's a wonderful place," I said, bowing slightly. "The pleasure is mine, Your Highness." "Indeed," Princess Marina added, her voice lilting like a tune, "and we can't wait to meet your famous friend, Miss Marple." As soon as she finished speaking, the door opened, revealing him. Hercule Poirot himself moved with a quiet dignity. His suit was immaculate, his mustache was shining, and his green eyes scanned the room with that familiar sharpness. A diminutive figure who somehow managed to command attention welcomed me before bowing to our hosts, "Your Highnesses." "I feel honored." Prince George's severe exterior occasionally cracked into a smile. "Monsieur Poirot, your presence makes our meeting more unique." Poirot bowed his head, saying, "You are too giving, Madame and Highness. Your grace is breathtaking." As they exchanged pleasantries, Marina's laughter was bright and endearing. "Oh, Miss Poirot, you'll turn my head with such words." I assessed the other visitors. Ms. Henri Dupont, a French artist, was painting Marina's portrait when he stood out, with his theatrical motions and a moustache almost as large as Poirot's. His eyes lingered on her with a warmth that suggested ancient rumors. In sharp contrast was German Ambassador Baron Hinrich von Stahl, silent and severe, his eyes darting with unsaid thoughts. Evelyn Carmichael, Mrs. a glamorous widow with a razor-sharp wit that sliced through the space like a blade and whispered connections to mysterious people, only made her more alluring. The crew moved with quiet purpose, as Dr. Alistair Gordon, a Scottish historian, leaned near a display case. His academic air was laced with an almost frantic curiosity in the royal treasures that were about to be exhibited. Evans, Clara Ara Thomas. Wells, the Duke's valet, was a charming and efficient young man whose every move was polished. Marina's maid was a strong woman, with straightforward speech and unfailing commitment, who fussed over her mistress's clothing. Marot. With an eerie calm that rendered her nearly invisible, the housemaid moved around the room like a wraith. The afternoon was busy getting ready for tomorrow night's dinner, which was supposed to be a lavish event to display the Kent diamonds, a necklace of incredible value, or so I'd heard. The staff was rushing around making sure everything was perfect, and I saw a shadow cross Prince George's face as he watched Marina laugh with Dupont. His jaw tightened, a silent testament to some unspoken strain her spending, which rumors suggested was extravagant beyond measure, but when she turned to him, his expression melted into one of quiet devotion. "I agree that there's something in the air, but I can't say what. Hastings, the currents run deep and quiet. "They're like a delicate dance. One must watch carefully to see who steps out of rhythm," he remarked, his eyes sparkling. As the visitors mixed and the servants worked, the palace hummed with excitement, its grandeur a great stage for the drama I saw forming. I felt a shiver of anticipation, thinking that this was no ordinary gathering and how correct I would turn out to be. The Vanishing Diamonds, in Chapter 2. The afternoon at Kensington Palace dawned bright and clear. It was a spring day that seemed to promise nothing more than a leisurely walk through the gardens. But as I've discovered during my time with Hercule Poirot, appearances can be incredibly deceiving. The palace's grand brick facade and well-kept grounds hummed with quiet anticipation for tomorrow night's dinner, which was to feature the renowned Kent diamonds as the centerpiece. Little did I know that by dusk the celebration would turn to Intrigue Poirot, and I had spent the morning in the library, a comfortable haven of leather-bound books and polished oak. He sat in an armchair, his eyes half closed in that feline manner, and I paced the room restlessly as usual. The palace felt alive all around us, its corridors resonating with the soft footsteps of servants getting ready for tomorrow night's festivities. Mon ami Poirot finally broke the silence, saying, "You are like a caged lion today." I stopped at the window and looked out at the well-kept lawns, but I couldn't think of anything in particular. Poirot is just this location, and while it's obviously wonderful, there's something strange about it. I guess it's the pomp and circumstance getting to me. In such settings, when the air is full of secrets, one must pay close attention to even the smallest detail, since it could portend a major upheaval. Pugh's eyes sparkled with that familiar sharpness. As usual, there was a weight to his words that I couldn't fully understand, but I knew better than to brush them off before I could respond. When the clock struck 4, I turned to look at the corridor. Princess Marina came down the grand staircase with a purposeful air, her silk gown shimmering in the afternoon light. Her expression was taut and her movements were brisk. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs to speak to Clara Ara Evans, her maid, who was standing there quietly and devotedly. "Clara," Marina said, her voice slightly tremulous, "take care. Of my gown and the diamonds, I have to go out for a little while, urgent business, you understand, of course, Your Highness." Clara Ara responded in a warm but brisk tone, "Everything will be ready when you return." I was perplexed by her haste, wondering what errand could pull a princess away on a day like this. Pooh joined me at the window, saying, "Most curious." "Maybe it's just nerves about the dinner," I suggested, but I wasn't convinced. "Maybe," Poirot murmured, though his tone suggested deeper suspicions, but I excused myself and continued walking through the palace corridors until I passed Marina's suite, where a jar with a world of elegant luxury silk drapes, gilded mirrors, and a shining dressing table with a leather case with its patent lock glinting Kent diamonds. "Captain Hastings," she said, straightening, "is there something you need?" I thought as Clara Ara bustled inside, arranging Marina's gown, a creation of lace and satin that danced in the light. She handled it with care, her plain features softened by pride in her work. She glanced up, catching my eye. I was shocked to be seen staring, so I said, No. I was just passing by. The gown is splendid. Her Highness will shine tomorrow night, diamonds or not." I nodded, my eyes straying to the diamond case. "They're really something, aren't they, the Kent diamonds? I mean, they're priceless." She smiled faintly. Before I could reply, a voice called from the hallway, "Clara, have you the directory? I can't find that blasted address." It was Thomas Wells, Prince George's valet, and he arrived at the door with a thick volume under his arm. His handsome face was creased with frustration. Clara Ara's voice was hushed with reverence. "His Highness treasures them dearly." With a sigh, Clara put the robe aside. It was in the sitting room. "I'll help you look, Thomas." She left the suite unguarded, leaving the diamond case sitting alone on the table with its contents presumably secure, though I hoped nothing bad would happen to them during her brief absence. As I turned to leave, I heard a faint rustle like fabric brushing stone, so I paused and looked back, but I saw nothing. The case remained untouched, and the suite was silent. I shook my head, dismissing it as fancy. In the sitting room, I discovered Clara and Thomas hunched over the directory, arguing earnestly, "It's not here." "Try under Cobbler's," Clara muttered impatiently. Thomas recommended turning the pages, so I cleared my throat so as not to interrupt. "Pardon me, is everything all right?" I asked. Clara's face brightened as she looked up, surprised. "Oh, Captain Hastings, we're just looking for a bootmaker's address, Mr. Higgins, for His Highness. It's rather urgent, may I assist?" I stepped forward, gratefully scanning the pages till I found it here. Higgins, 23 Baker Street. Clara sighed with relief. "Bless you, Captain Thomas," and hurried off. Clara resumed her duties as I headed back toward the drawing room, where a mysterious rustle came from Marina's suite. I approached the door, which was now closed, and hesitated, thinking it was probably just a servant, and I had no business prying later that afternoon. The drawing room was bustling with conversation when I rejoined the guests. Mrs. Evelyn Carmichael held court, her glamour undemeaned, while Baron Hinrich Vonal stood apart, his stern face unreadable, and Dr. Alistair Gordon-Ling near a display case, his eyes bright with a scholar's fervour, and Monsieur Henri Dupont made wildly amusing gestures, while a footman Puot sat quietly amused by his expression. I said, "Yes, I'm settling next to him." Before I could understand his meaning, Hastings responded with a tapestry of motives, each thread waiting to unravel. Princess Your Highness Marina came in with a pale face, shaky steps as if she were carrying an invisible weight, hands gripped firmly, and eyes darting around as the conversation died down. Mrs. Carmichael's tone, "Honey, are you doing okay?" made me grin, but it was shaky at the edges. "Yes, thank you." It was just a little tired, but I could see the fear in her eyes and the shake of her hands as she smoothed her gown. A few moments later, Prince George entered with a thunderous intensity that replaced his stern demeanour. He looked at Marina and sensed her distress, saying, "Marina," in a low, urgent voice, what is it?" She paused, her lips parted, but she didn't say anything. She shook her head and pleaded. "If you'll excuse us," he said curtly, leading Marina out. Puot rose, he said, his eyes narrowing. "Something is amiss, Hastings," he murmured. "Let us investigate." We followed discreetly until we arrived at Marina's suite. George closed the door with a thud, his face a mask of controlled fury. He turned to us, saying, "The diamonds are gone." Marina stood nearby, trembling. "I don't know how it happened," she stammered. "When I returned at 7 sound, the case was empty, so I hid it, George, because I didn't know what else to do." He paced and then stopped facing her. "I was afraid," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "I trusted Clara implicitly. She has never let me down, and the palace has always been secure. I thought they'd be safe on the table for a moment, not locked away in a safe since I'd be back so soon. Puro mu puro, I need your assistance, and it must be discreet before tomorrow's dinner." "Of course, Your Highness," I bowed, slightly unshaken. "Hercus, I'm here to help Poirot." Since then, I have remained near Poirot, determined to follow him everywhere. When we entered the suite together, my mind was racing. The diamond case was open on the dressing table, its velvet lining bare, a stark testament to the theft. Clara said, "I left it there," her face ashen, while I helped Thomas. When I returned, I checked the case and the diamonds were still there. I would swear it Poirot was kneeling next to the table, tracing its surface with her fingers. "And yet they are gone," he said. "Tell me, Mademoiselle Evans, did you notice anything when you returned?" Clara scowled as I walked back down the hallway, thinking I could have heard a fast stride or the rustle of fabric, but the room was vacant and the case appeared undisturbed when I walked in. I nodded twice, once when I passed earlier and again after assisting with the directory, but I didn't see anyone particularly intriguing. Poirot's eyes glistened as you spoke. "Did you hear anything, Hastings?" George paced and mumbled. "This is a disaster," as Poirot stated. "Our thief is a phantom moving unseen." Poirot put a comforting hand on his arm and said, "Don't give up, Your Highness. The little grey cells are at work. We have until tomorrow evening, but we must act swiftly." As Poirot started his inspection, I sensed that familiar feeling. The dinner was tomorrow, and the diamonds were supposed to be the centerpiece. Exhilaration, tension, and horror as Poirot leads the way in uncovering the truth, which is cleverly concealed. Poirot takes the case in Chapter 3. Prince George stood rigid, his stern features taut with suppressed rage, while Princess Marina hovered near the doorway, her delicate hands clasped tightly to steady their trembling. The suite, once a haven of royal refinement, had turned into a scene of quiet turmoil by late afternoon. The dressing table, which had been decorated with its gilded mirror and delicate perfume bottles, now held the empty diamond case like a wound, a stark void where the Kent diamonds should have rested. The case itself was a sturdy leather affair, its patent lock gleaming under the electric lights meant to protect its precious contents, but now stood open, its velvet lining bare a silent testament to the theft. I positioned myself close to Poirot, determined to follow his every move in this developing drama. He stood in the middle of the room, his small frame radiating an authority that belied his stature, and Clara Evans, the faithful maid, hovered nearby, her plain face pale with distress, her every gesture a testament to her devotion. After a brief period of pacing that seemed to prolong the silence, his piercing green eyes darted over every aspect, turning to Prince George with a solemn moussia. "This is a matter requiring the utmost discretion. The dinner is tomorrow evening, and our guests must remain ignorant of this calamity. I charge you with its investigation. Can you undertake it?" Poe said in a clipped yet controlled tone. With a slight tremble in his moustache, Pooh bowed his head and said, "Your Highness, it is a privilege to serve Hercule." "I'm thankful, Massey. Poe will solve this enigma with all the tact it requires." George's shoulders relaxed a little, and a glimmer of relief crossed his stern face. "With that we have until tomorrow night. First we must preserve the scene," he said, as Poirot began to work his movements deliberately and precisely, as if each step were a part of a big dance. "Would you, mon ami, make sure that nobody else enters this suite? We need to avoid any unintentional interference." From there I could clearly see Poirot's methodical inspection. He started at the dressing table, kneeling with a grace that defied his meticulous nature, to examine the diamond case. His nimble fingers brushed the lock, and his brow creased as he murmured, "Most curious." The lock, though sturdy, shows no signs of force, scratches, or distortion. After that, the thief might have possessed a key or had first-hand knowledge of how to open it, without causing any harm. Prince George scowled intensely as he hovered close, but only Marina and Clara are granted such privileges. Poirot rose, flicking his trousers with precision. "Your Highness, this suggests an insider who is acquainted with the delightful secrets." Marina, who had been silent while a shadow cried out faintly, "You mean that someone in the palace turned to her?" Poirot's tone softened, suggesting that it might be someone. He proceeded to the window, parted the silk drapes and peered into the dusk-lit gardens below. The drop was sheer and the frame was unmarked. No entry from without, he concluded, drawing the curtain shut with a decisive tug. The thief walked these halls and my eyes strayed to Clara, whose hands were twisted nervously, but she approached her with a gentle air. "Mademoiselle Evans, when you examined the case, you last saw the gems." "Yes, sir," Clara said in a trembling voice. "When I came back from helping Thomas, they were still there, and I would risk my life for it." "Where were you while the princess was away?" Poirot asked in a gentle but inquisitive tone. "In the sitting room. Thomas, sir, was looking for the address of a bootmaker for his Highness." Poirot's eyes glowed, and Thomas asked, "Where are you now?" Clara had earlier told him to pick up a pair of boots for his Highness, and Poirot nodded before turning to George and saying, "I must speak with this Thomas and the housemaid Ellis Marrow. Where might she be?" George's brow was wrinkled. "Elise, who I haven't seen since this morning, is normally busy with her work." Poirot's moustache quirked, indicating that his thoughts were racing. "Her absence is noteworthy, so we need to find her." I came closer, wanting to help. "Should I look for her?" Poirot waved me back, saying, "No, Hastings, stay here. I'll call for help." He called for a footman who showed in with a bow, found Mademoiselle Marrow and brought her to me. After giving the footman instructions to leave quickly, Poirot continued exploring and led us to the housemaid's quarters. He pushed open a jar that stood in a small chamber off the corridor, and the room was neat except for a small distinctive button that was stuck in the doorframe. Its thread was frayed as though it had been torn in haste, and his eyes lit up with curiosity as he pulled it free and examined it carefully. "Voila," he said, holding it in the air. "A clue recently left, I wager." Observing the button's peculiar appearance, I asked myself, what could it mean? With a mysterious smirk, Poirot said, "That Hastings is what we must deduce." The footman came back panting. "There is no poor Mademoiselle Marrow. It is too soon to judge your Highness if you suspect her." Poirot adjusted her pocket, but the button was missing. George was becoming anxious. Poirot calmly responded, "When you interacted with Mademoiselle Elmo Maroro earlier, did you happen to notice her hands?" I thought back to our brief interaction when she served me tea in the drawing room, and I remember thinking that her hands were rather fine, soft, not the hands of a common housemaid. Her absence raises questions, as does this button, though I cannot yet say to whom it belongs. So we must proceed with caution. Poe turned to me, his gaze piercing Hastings. Returning to the suite, he continued his examination, stopping by the alcove of the corridor to trace a faint scratch on the wall. He pondered, though, by whom Marina, now seated and pale, met Poirot's gentle inquiry. "Madame, upon your return, did anything strike you as odd?" She shook her head weakly. "No, only the empty case." I was too shaken to notice more, and Poirot's tone remained kind. "Your departure earlier, madame, was quite abrupt. May I ask what kind of urgent business you had to attend to?" "It was a private situation, Miss Poe, a family matter that needed my quick care." Marina hesitated, her eyes darting to George. Poe nodded, not pressing further, but his eyes had a contemplative sparkle. "Very well, Madame Courage, we will make things right." I stayed by Poirot's side as we entered the drawing-room, where the guests' murmurs had turned into a chorus of uneasiness. Monsieur Dupont stood by the fireplace, his eyes warm and almost fixated on Marina. Baron von Aal paced, his stern manner concealing some hidden agitation. Mrs. Carmichael's humour broke the tension, and Dr. Gordon's anxious looks revealed his uneasiness. When Poirot arrived, the room became silent. "Your Highnesses, ladies and gentlemen," he declared, "a theft has occurred and the Kent diamonds are missing. I am charged with its resolution, and I require your cooperation," said Mrs. Carmichael, clutching her pearls, as a collective gasp was followed by murmuring. Von Stahl's eyes darted and she raised a hand. "No one leaves until the matter is settled." George's unwavering support put an end to the muttering protests. Poirot watched them while leaning near to me. The guests' scattered whispers suggest that Hastings' actions may have betrayed them. Poirot trusted. The thief is skilled Hastings, and not alone an accomplice lurks within these walls. An inside job? The palace, which was once a stronghold of splendor, now pulsed with mistrust. And with Poirot leading the way, I knew the truth was close. I ventured, and he said, "Eyes all light, and by tomorrow evening I shall name them." Chapter 4, Interrogating the Visitors. The night before, Poe and I had gone to the library to reflect on the day's events, as he drank a cup of tisane with his eyes half closed, in that recognizable feline fashion. I, on the other hand, attempted to solve the puzzle in my own clumsy way, but I knew better than to interrupt him. The palace salon, a large room with tall windows and gilded furnishings, should have exuded regal calm, but today it carried the weight of unease following a tense breakfast during which the guests exchanged fervent glances and whispered speculations. The morning dawned over Kensington Palace with a heavy mist-laden stillness, as though the very air held its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Poirot asked everyone to stay in the salon while he made his investigations. The theft of the Kent diamonds, which was discovered the night before, had turned this elegant gathering into a scene of suspicion, even though the housemaid Elise Marot was among the staff, and her demeanour was as unremarkable as ever. I stood by a window, the gardens beyond obscured by fog, and watched Poirot get ready for the task at hand. His diminutive size belied his authority, and his moustache gleamed with careful care, and his green eyes scanned the assembly with a sharpness that missed nothing. The princess's distress, the empty diamond case, and Poirot's discovery of that odd button had set the stage for this morning's interrogations, and I experienced the familiar thrill of being at his side as the mystery deepened. "Mesdames et messieurs, you are aware of the misfortune that has befallen this house. The Kent diamonds are no longer in their rightful place, and I, Hercule Poirot, am tasked with their recovery. I must ask each of you to recount your movements yesterday afternoon between 4 and 7. The truth is hidden in the details, and I shall find it," Poirot said, his voice breaking through the tension with precise clarity. Mrs. Evelyn Carmichael, who was dressed beautifully in a silk shawl despite the early hour, uttered a harsh laugh that sounded hollow as a murmur echoed through the room. "Really, Monsieur Poirot, this is most theatrical. Surely you don't think one of us stooped to thievery?" Despite being courteous, Poirot's smile had steel underneath it. "Madame, in a situation like this, every option needs to be considered in order to protect privacy." He motioned to a footman who led the way to a quiet room filled with leather-bound volumes and thick oak furnishings, where each suspect could speak freely without worrying about being overheard. I shall conduct these interviews in the Duke's private study, one guest at a time. Let us begin. Monsieur Henri Dupont, a French artist, was called first. He sat down across from Poirot, his expressive hands trembling as he entered the room, twirling his colourful moustache. I stayed by the door, ready to help if necessary. Dupont-Poirot's eyes darted to the door, as if he was expecting Marina to appear. He said in a measured tone, "You have a history with the Princess Marina. Tell me of it." "It is no secret," he said, his voice shaky, "that I knew her in years past. We were close friends. Nothing more now. My feelings for her are purely artistic admiration." Poirot's eyes narrowed a little. "But your gaze on her yesterday conveyed more than just admiration. Tell me how long you've known Princess Dupont, who has been flushed since her youth in Greece. I assure you, monsieur, that our relationship is now solely professional. I'm here to paint her portrait." "Where were you yesterday afternoon?" Poirot asked, guiding the conversation to the pivotal moment when I was alone in my room drawing her portrait from memory. Dupont replied, his fingers tightening on his creation from memory. "You say," Poirot pressed, "is it your custom to sketch without your subject present?" "Sometimes, yes." Dupont acknowledged that when the light is wrong or inspiration strikes alone, you say, and no one can verify this. When Baron Heinrich von Stull was called into the study, the German diplomat stood stiff, his icy eyes meeting Poirot's steely reserve. Poirot's sharp eyes noticed a blot of ink on the Baron's cuff and asked casually, "You are a man of letters, Baron?" The Baron stiffened. "Yes, I was writing correspondence at the time of the theft," Poirot asked in a deceptively mild tone. "Yeah," von Stull responded. "I was in my quarters undisturbed, with his tone clipped." "That's confidential," and von Stull's jaw stiffened. "Miss Poirot, it doesn't matter here." I knew he had noticed something important in a theft when his mustache gave a slight twitch. "Since everything needs to be revealed, Baron, maybe you could show me these letters, or at the very least the envelopes." The Baron hesitated, then nodded curtly. "If you insist, but they are of a diplomatic nature." "We shall see," Poirot whispered, his eyes never leaving the Baron's face. Mrs. Evelyn Carmichael was next, her glamour undimemed as she lounged into the study, though her hands clutched her pearls a bit too tightly. Poirot, who had always been perceptive, had noticed her unsteady gait and flushed cheeks the night before, indications of indulging in the palace's fine wines. "What can you recall of your movements?" "I'd had a glass or two too many. Miss, a champagne does go to one's head," she said, laughing, but her laugh faded. "I was in the drawing room making merry until I retired early." "And did you notice anything unusual?" she said. "Well, on my way back to my room, I thought I saw someone darting down the corridor on the far end. They moved swiftly like a shadow, but my vision was blurred, so I can't be certain who it was or if it was anyone at all," Poirot said, in a deceptively mild tone, her eyes flickering. Poe's gaze sharpened, but he simply nodded. "The wine can play tricks. Thank you, Dr. Alistair, madam." During yesterday's tour of the palace treasures, Gordon clutched a book and entered his academic air, plagued by a nervous tick in his jaw. He remembered the doctor's rapt attention when the diamonds were mentioned, his eyes lingering on the case with an almost feverish intensity. According to Poirot, your fascination with the Kent diamonds was evident. "I am a historian, and such artifacts are of great interest to me." Gordon's tick grew worse. "During the tour you asked several questions about their history and security, did you not?" Poirot responded. "Where were you yesterday afternoon?" "In the library, studying manuscripts. Mr. Harrington and his wife were with me as a footman, so I couldn't have been near the suite very well." Poirot's tone was neutral, "which will be confirmed at last by the staff Clara Evans. Elise Marrow and Thomas Wells were called together, and while Elise stood quietly next to them, with her hands clasped modestly in front of her, her expression unreadable, and Poirot said, "We spoke yesterday, but I must ask again, you tended the diamond case. Tell me once more of your actions. I checked it before and after helping Thomas." Elise was plain and strong, and she met Pooh's gaze with resolve. When I left with him to find the bootmaker's address, Clara's voice was steady and secure. "Is it customary for you to leave the diamond case unattended, even for a moment?" Poirot asked in a gentle but perceptive tone. Clara's cheeks coloured. "No, sir, but I trusted the palace's security," so he nodded before turning to face Thomas, Mr. Wells. "Mademoiselle Moreau, where were you during the princess's absence?" I asked Elise Moreau, who had been standing silently after I finished my errand to Baker Street. "Did you run into anyone on your way out or upon your return?" Thomas shook his head. "No, sir. The corridor was empty when I left, and when I returned I saw no one. I was cleaning the guest quarters," Elise said steadily and softly. "And did you notice anyone near the princess's suite?" I asked, confident that I had not noticed anything out of the ordinary. Poirot queried, looking at her face. "No, monsieur," and she met his stare steadily, saying, "I was focused on my duties. Each thread is a piece of the puzzle, but the pattern is hidden, so we must proceed carefully." The interviews came to an end, and the guests scattered in a rustle of unease, their whispers trailing like smoke. Poirot nodded, his expression giving nothing away. "Thank you, mademoiselle." He stepped back, clasping his hands behind him. "I thank you all. We have a lot to consider." He turned to me. I watched him wonder, as always, at the workings of his mind. The palace, once a bulwark of magnificence, now pulsing with secrets, and with Poirot guiding, I knew the truth could not be kept concealed for long. "Mon ami," he whispered, "but the weave is complex. We must proceed with care because the truth is near." Chapter 5. The Secret of the Garden. As midday drew near, the morning mist that had surrounded Kensington Palace since dawn started to lift, but a lingering chill seemed to emanate from the very stones of the place, as if it sensed the sinister secrets we were discovering. The gardens, with their precise hedges and gravel paths, stretched out in front of us in serene splendor, but they now held an air of anticipation, as though they were waiting for the next act in this unfolding drama. Following the suspect interviews in the salon, Poirot had declared that it was necessary to explore the grounds because his keen mind was convinced that the thief might have left some irresponsible trace outside the palace walls. "Mummy," he said, his voice carrying that quiet authority I knew so well, "the palace is a stage, yes, but the gardens, they are the wings where the players may falter. We shall see what they reveal." I nodded, but I have to admit that I was a little unsure of what we might still discover. The crunch of gravel beneath our boots provided a steady backdrop to the distant hum of the palace behind us as we stepped forth, walking in friendly silence for a while. Poirot's instincts were rarely wrong, and I followed him voluntarily. Despite my thoughts racing with the mystery at hand, I found myself in awe of the palace's grandeur as we approached a secluded corner of the garden where a rosebush stood in full bloom. A glint of metal half hidden among the thorns caught my attention, and I bent to retrieve it. The path wound past elaborate fountains and carefully pruned topiaries, pausing occasionally to examine a footprint or a disturbed patch of earth. My heartbeat quickened as I held it in the air. He took it from me with a gleam in his eye and turned it over in his gloved hands. "Ah, Hastings, take a close look at this key. It's not your typical one. Notice the new cut of the metal, the lack of wear and the markings on it. It was made especially to open the diamond case, no doubt about it. But how can you be sure it's a duplicate?" I asked, intrigued. Poirot's mustache twitched with a faint smile. "This one is immaculate, as if it has never been used. But Hastings has the patina of age, with minor scratches and a dullness to the metal. It fits the lock precisely, which is why it is a duplicate, and its being here indicates deliberate preparation and premeditation." I felt a rush of excitement, so the criminal had planned this ahead of time, possibly with the help of someone with access. With a contented nod, Poirot whispered, "Now we must ask ourselves who had such foresight. Our discovery encouraged us to keep going, and Poirot proposed that we approach the royal guards to ask about any strange sightings. We discovered a young guard stationed near the east wing the previous afternoon, his face drawn and nervous under his cap, as if the theft were weighing heavily on him. "Did you see anyone near the princess's suite yesterday, perhaps behaving oddly?" Poirot asked in a gently but firm tone. The guard shifted and then slowly nodded. "Yes, sir. Around 5 I saw a figure in servant's attire lingering near the suite. They seemed unsettled, glancing about as if afraid of being watched, but the light was dim and I couldn't make out who it was, only that they wore the livery of the palace staff." Poirot's eyes sharpened, though his expression remained calm. "5:30, you say, just before the princess returned. Most interesting, thank you, Mrs." As we turned away, I felt a stir of suspicion. The guard's testimony pointed to a servant, however. It could have been any of the staff or someone disguised as one. Could it be one of the staff, Poirot? Patience, Hastings. A single thread does not make a tapestry. We must gather more. I raised a hand in warning. We went back to the suite, but this time Poirot took us to the hallway just outside, where a little alcove had a beautiful table. Behind a vase I noticed a crystal glass with a little lipstick stain on the rim. Poirot lifted it and sniffed the residue while frowning slightly. I'm still perplexed. She acknowledged that she had consumed a lot of alcohol the previous evening. Could she have left it here? Perhaps Poirot responded, carefully laying the glass down, or maybe it's there to deceive us. The champagne and lipstick hue are Madame Carmichael. A glass by itself doesn't do much, but it's a cunning diversion that muddies the waters. No, I nodded, but I must admit that it was difficult for me to imagine the glitzy widow stumbling around with a glass in her hand, let alone committing theft. Nevertheless, Poirot's words sowed doubt in my mind as we considered this, and as I turned to face the corridor, Princess Marina was standing there, her face pallid. Madame, Poirot replied politely, "You seem most distressed. Is there something you wish to confide in?" She paced, lost in concentration, her hands twisting a lace handkerchief with an anxiety that had developed since yesterday. "I can't stand to wait any longer," she said, her black eyes widening. "Oh, Mon Poirot, it's just the diamonds." Poirot's eyes lingered on her as her voice faltered. "Your burden is heavy, madame, but I sense more beneath it. If there is anything, even a trifle, it may aid us." She hesitated, parting her lips, but then shook her head, saying, "No, monsieur, I've told you all I know." Poirot moved closer, his voice becoming more softer. Madame Marina's breath caught, and for a second I thought she may confess, but then she pulled herself up, her look hardening. "And I realized you were wrong. I see the terror in your eyes. It's not just the loss of the diamonds that worries you, is it? Monsieur, it is only the theft, nothing more." She turned away abruptly, but Poirot's eyes followed her with a thoughtful frown she conceals. "Something, Hastings," he murmured to me, her nervousness. "It is not merely grief she fears exposure, but of what a secret, perhaps tied to the theft or to something deeper." The palace now seemed to close in. Around us, its grandeur overshadowed by a tension that hung like a tightening web, each clue the key, the guards, words the glass were a pattern I could not yet grasp. Though I trusted Poirot saw more than I. We paused in the grand hall, and Poirot's eyes gleamed with that quiet intensity I knew signaled a breakthrough. "There is a hidden hand here, mon ami," he said, "a culprit. Orchestrating from the shadows. The little grey. Cells they work, and soon we shall see the design." I could only nod as ever by his certainty. The palace, once a place of splendor, now thrummed with suspicion, and with Poirot at the helm, I felt the truth, drawing near, though its shape remained tantalizingly out of reach. Chase in the palace in Chapter 6. An undercurrent of tension pulsed through the air, as strongly as the distant hum of London beyond the palace walls. Despite the warmth and elegance of Kensington Palace's grand halls, as the afternoon sun shone in a golden glow, its beams slanting through the tall windows to dance upon the polished marble floors. The theft of the Kent diamonds, which was discovered the night before, had cast a shadow over this royal residence, turning its elegant hallways into a suspicious theatre. In the main hall, a vast space filled with tapestries and portraits of stern-faced royals, I found myself standing next to Poirot. His small, immaculate figure stood motionless, dwarfed by the grandeur, but he exuded an air of command. His hands were clasped behind his back, and he twirled his moustache absently, a habit I knew signaled the furious workings of his little grey cells. The servants moved with hurried steps, their faces taut with unease, while the guests whispered in the corners, their eyes darting as if they were afraid of the next accusation. The thief or their shadow stays close in a place like this. The truth does not run far, and we must watch Hastings for the smallest slip. We had spent the morning sorting through clues, the duplicate key, the smudged glass, the guard sighting, and now as the clock struck 3, Poirot seemed poised on the edge of revelation. I said, keeping my voice low so as not to disturb his thoughts, "Do you suppose the thief is still among us, hiding in plain sight?" He turned to me, his green eyes glinting with intensity. I looked around and saw nothing but the flicker of sunlight on the walls, but he stiffened his gaze and snapped to a shadowed doorway at the far end of the hall. "You there!" he cried, his voice ringing out with sudden authority. "Reveal yourself at once." The hall held its breath for a heartbeat before a figure emerged from the shadows, a cloaked shape, their features obscured by the dimness. They paused as if caught mid-step before whirling about and racing down the corridor with a speed that set my pulse racing. I leapt after him, my heart pounding as we chased after him. The figure darted through the hall, their cloak a dark blur against the marble, and flung open a side door that led to the grand staircase. Down they went, their footsteps echoing with Poirot and me close behind. His agility astounded me. His fidgety nature guards were belied by the purposeful movement of those small legs. The figure rushed through an outer door into the gardens, where the afternoon sun shone on the well-kept lawns and sparkling fountains. They scurried through the hedges, their movements desperate, but the guards fanned out, cutting off their escape near the wrought iron gates. Poirot called as we descended to the gardens, and the palace guards, awakened by his cry, joined the pursuit, their heavy boots thundering in our wake. The figure staggered over a low stone boundary, and the guards jumped, grabbed their arms, and dragged them upright. I was exhausted when I got to them, and when they drew back the hood I saw a young guy I didn't recognize. His face was pale and his eyes were wild with defiance. "Who are you?" I asked. "And what do you here?" Poirot said in a tone as harsh as a dagger. The soldiers held him firmly, while the man struggled for a moment before he fell in their grasp. "I have no name for you," he whispered, his voice harsh. He then stepped forward, his eyes digging into the prisoners. A corner of crumpled paper peeked out of the man's jeans pocket, and Poirot's sharp eyes snapped to it. With a quick motion he peeled it free and smoothed it open, exposing a scrolling letter. "Retrieve the envelope from the suite, leave it at the oak tree by midnight. You were hired, were you not?" "This is your instruction," Poirot remarked, holding the note high. The man's defiance faltered, and he turned away from Espar. He said, "I don't know who sent me a letter came with coin, and I did as it bid an envelope. I was paid to retrieve an envelope from the suite, nothing more." His voice was a little shaking. "I don't know what was in this envelope," the man snapped, "and I was told to leave it at a drop point by the oak tree. That's all I was told. I swear I had nothing to do with stealing any diamonds or this envelope." Poirot persisted, saying the diamonds were stolen yesterday evening, so it couldn't be them you sought today. "Where is it now?" asked Poirot. When I arrived at the suite that was specified in my instructions, Poirot's eyebrows narrowed and he tapped the note against his hand. "I could not find it," he said glumly. "How did you, a stranger, get past the palace's watchful guards to reach the suite?" he asked. The individual paused and then, "I wore a servant's uniform, borrowed it from a mate who works here, got in through the kitchens this morning. No one stopped me." Before he could say anything more, I noticed a movement above and looked up to see Princess Marina at a window overlooking the gardens. Her face was a mask of anxiety. Her hands gripped the sill and her dark eyes were fixed on the scene below. For a brief moment our gazes locked, and she quickly withdrew, but not before I could see the fear etched on her beautiful features. Poirot followed my gaze, his head tilting as he watched her retreat with great curiosity. He whispered in a low voice, and the princess watched with interest as Hastings expressed concern that it wasn't just for the diamonds. I believe the guards took the captive away, his protests waning as they marched him toward the palace. Poirot turned to face me, his face displaying a mixture of curiosity and frustration. "This man is merely a tool. This pawn was moved by a hidden hand, and the thief or the person in charge of them left something in the suite. The envelope is not the diamonds, but it contains a secret that they now fear. Why else send a man to retrieve it at such risk? It might be a clue to their identity or motive that was missed in the chaos of the theft. The mastermind tries to hide their tracks, but they are unable to send the thief back. Perhaps he is being watched or is unable to return, so this pawn is sent, and in his capture, we get a glimpse of the truth." I nodded, my mind racing, but how Poirot claims ignorance and we have no evidence to pressure him further. "This note is a thread we shall follow," Mon ami Poirot said in a firm and determined voice. "I will ask the kitchen staff about this borrowed uniform and find the servant who helped him, whether he knew it or not. The drop point at the oak tree is the princess's fear. These are clues. We will gradually uncover the why and the how of Hastings until the when discloses the who, which the truth cannot conceal from Hercule." For a long time, I kept thinking about Marina's worried face as we made our way back to the castle. Was her secret connected to the heist or something more private, with Poirot spearheading the investigation? Even if the route to the answers was as convoluted as the palace's own hallways, I knew they were close. The housemaid's revelation, Chapter 7. The late afternoon draped. Kensington Palace in a golden haze, the sun's waning rays, slanting through the tall windows of the quiet study where Hercule Poirot had chosen to conduct his latest inquiry. The room, a sanctuary of leather-bound volumes and polished oak, seemed to absorb the day's tension, its stillness amplifying the faint tick of an ormolu clock upon the mantel. I stood by the door, my usual post as Poirot's faithful shadow, watching as he faced Ellis Moreau, who sat rigid upon a stiff-backed chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, betrayed a tremor she could not suppress, and her eyes darted nervously as though seeking an escape that did not exist. Earlier that day, Poirot had confided in me his growing suspicions about Elle. Moreau, her demeanor. Hastings, it is not that of an innocent maid, he had said, his eyes gleaming with that familiar intensity. She knows more than she lets on, and I must find a way to draw it out after lunch. Poirot approached Elise with his characteristic blend of charm and authority. Mademoiselle Moreau, he said, his voice smooth as silk, I wonder if you might assist me with a small matter. There are some details about the palace routines that I must clarify, and your insight would be most valuable. Elise, taken by surprise, paused just a second before nodding. Of course, Poirot, I'm very good at serving you. Poe's smile disarmingly replied, let's retire to the study where we can speak without interruption. You understand that this is a delicate matter, and discretion is paramount. Now, mademoiselle said. Gesturing to a chair, Elise followed him, her steps wavering slightly. As they entered the study, Poirot had purposefully picked this room as a private, controlled area where the weight of its intellectual ambience may further unsettle her. Let us discuss your duties here at the palace, Poirot said, his tone changing to one of mild inquiry. With that serene, even melodic tone, Poirot went on to say, have you been a housemaid here for a few months? Have you not prayed? I cleaned the guest quarters. Elise swallowed hard, twisting a fold of her apron. You find this task acceptable, Muir, she said, her voice a thin thread of sound, cleaning, sweeping, taking care of the linens, etc. Poirot tilted his head slightly and stared at her with his emerald eyes. I have no cause to complain, she answered, although her eyes strayed to the door. Poe nodded as like he was just killing time. I think you mentioned 6 months ago that we had enough time to get to know the palace, its customs, its riches, and maybe even its mysteries. I'm not sure what you mean, but her hands froze, and a glimmer of defiance appeared in her eyes. With a purposeful flourish, Monsieur, this button, mademoiselle, was found near the princess's suite, close to where the Kent diamonds disappeared. Poirot reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it between his thumb and forefinger. It matches those on your uniform. Doesn't it make Elise's face pale as she looks at the damning evidence? Many of us wear buttons like this. Though her voice faltered, she retorted that it could have belonged to anyone. Maybe Poirot had admitted his tone was deceptively gentle, but a guard remembered seeing you close to the suite at the exact moment of the theft, 5:30. How do you explain that? She shook her head, the defiance crumbling. He's wrong, she said. I was elsewhere cleaning the guest quarters alone. Pooh's voice grew sharper, piercing her objection. This is particularly intriguing, because I asked the personnel and none of them could verify your presence there at that time. Which is your alibi? It doesn't hold water, mademoiselle. I was by myself when she stumbled, and her hands were shaking openly. No one noticed me because I was working hard. Poe leaned forward and stared at me unflinchingly. But I have more in my possession, a record, if we may use that term, of a meeting between you and an insider inside these walls where plans were laid out. Maybe her eyes widened in panic, but there's no such proof. You're bluffing. Am I sure? Poirot's voice sank to a whisper, and each word was like a hammer blow. She said, the truth, mademoiselle, presses upon you like a weight. Speak now, and it might still lighten your burden for a moment. She held her mouth firmly, pressing it into a thin line, but then, as if a dam had burst, she crumpled, burying her face in her hands. Oh, God help me, I took them, I stole the diamonds, but I swear I didn't know they were false. I began to be shocked, but Poirot simply raised a hand to silence me, with unwavering attention. He begged, continue, mademoiselle, in a soft, enticing tone. Who are you really, and what did you steal? She raised her head and spoke in a broken whisper. My name isn't Elise Marrow, but Sophie Lauren, and I'm a thief by trade. I was hired to steal what I thought were the real Kent diamonds, and I spent months here pretending to be a housemaid, waiting for the right moment. When I opened the case, they were paste clever imitations, but they were worthless and I had risked everything for nothing. Pooh's eyes glowed with comprehension. Sophie's expression grew stern. An individual with access to the palace and an understanding of the diamond's importance promised me a fortune for the real stones, but I was just as much duped as everybody else. When he hired you, Poirot asked whether he knew the gems weren't real. I think he did. Sophie reluctantly acknowledged it, but now that I had time to consider it, he seemed too sure of the idea. I believe he intended me to steal the fake jewels in order to hide some other plot. Poirot's face stayed calm, but his eyes glowed with victory. As if relishing the revelation, Sophie Laurent pondered. A name known in some circles, I bet. And this insider, who might they be, mademoiselle? The game is up. You gain nothing by silence. She shook her head, her resolve hardening despite her tears. I'll not say they'd ruin me or worse. I've confessed my part, that must suffice for now. He sighed, a faint note of frustration in his breath, but his demeanor remained unruffled admirably. Madame Laurent. A stern-faced guard dragged her away, and I turned to Poirot, my mind racing, thinking, good heavens, you shall remain under guard until you reconsider the truth. It has a way of emerging with or without your aid. Poirot, a skilled criminal among us, asserts that the diamonds were only a component of a bigger plot. Now his eyes were far away but keen as he carefully adjusted his handcuffs. At Hastings we look at Princess Marina. Her anguish and her unexpected errand yesterday all suggest a deeper connection. Although Sophie may be afraid to identify her accomplice, the small grey cells show the pattern. The accomplice? I cried out, remembering the shaky hands and intense looks. You think you know who it is? Pooh's smile was mysterious, and I believe Mon Ami knows that tomorrow's meal will expose everything it is unable to conceal from Hercule. Poirot, the majesty of the palace now tinted with a sense of foreboding as we entered the corridor from the study. The clock struck 6, indicating that darkness was approaching, but I didn't feel comfortable with Poirot in charge because the truth was about to be revealed, even though it promised a spectacle as magnificent as the palace itself. Chapter 8. The Mastermind. The golden hues of sunset faded into the soft shine of chandeliers that illuminated the vast drawing room, which was a chamber of magnificent magnificence, with velvet drapes in deep crimson-framed large windows, while the evening descended over Kensington Palace, with an almost stifling stillness. We were all gathered there, a mottled assembly of guests and staff, and our nerves stretched to the limit as Prince George stood by the hearth, his stern face a mask of controlled agitation, while Princess Marina sat nearby. Her lovely features pale and strained the other guests. Gilded mirrors reflected the flickering light, and portraits of long-gone monarchs stared down with an air of solemn reproach. However, beneath this regal facade, a palpable tension simmered, as though the very air awaited the moment of reckoning. Monsieur Fonal, Henri Dupont, Baron Hercule Poirot, stood in the middle of the room, his little, spotless figure radiating a peaceful authority that halted the whispers, as Mrs. Carmichael and Dr. Gordon shuffled uneasily in their seats or whispered in low tones. I positioned myself as usual near the doorway so that I could see Poirot and the group of people gathered there. His suit was flawless as always, his moustache shining with careful attention to detail, and as he flicked his cuffs to adjust them, I knew his little grey cells were ready to unravel the complex web of this mystery. With a deliberate step, he moved to the center of the room, his voice piercing the silence with crystal clarity. Madame Emissive, I appreciate you being here. This noble house has been shadowed by the theft of the Kent diamonds, but tonight I, Hercule Poirot, shall bring light to the darkness. A murmur sounded throughout the room, but it quickly stopped when Poirot raised a hand. Let's start with the thief, he said in a calm yet authoritative tone. The one who spirited away the diamonds from the princess's suite. That person is none other than the housemaid Miss Marple, or as she is truly known, Sophie Laurent, a thief of some renown who confessed to me this very afternoon. Stood near the staff, her wraith-like figure suddenly conspicuous. Poirot continued undeterred. He paused to allow the revelation to sink in, then turned to Princess Marina, who looked at him for a moment before turning away, her fingers tightening until her knuckles widened. But here, mes amis, is where the story becomes truly fascinating. Poirot continued, his voice taking on an air of intrigue. For you see, the diamonds that Sophie stole were not the genuine Kent diamonds. The question, "Marina, what does he mean?" stung Marina's breath, and Prince George turned to look at her, his stern features etched with uncertainty. Pooh's eyes sparkled as he said, "The princess, you see, had already pawned the real diamonds. Days before the theft, she was being blackmailed, forced into this desperate act by someone who held a damaging secret over her head." However, before responding, Poirot focused on Mizzi or Dupont, who had been twitching with his cravat during the entire ordeal. Poirot claimed that Mizzi was the brains behind this complex hoax. The princess was ensnared by blackmail. Was she not Miss Orion Dupont, the artist who held over her a secret, a revelation that, if revealed, would jeopardize her standing among the royals? I won't name it because some things are best left to the imagination, but Poirot persisted, despite the fact that Henri Dupont's face turned pale. He turned back to Marina, his tone gentle but firm. George tensed his jaw dangerously. "You blackmailed my wife, Poirot." But this is where Monsieur Dupont's scheme really took a turn for the worse. He knew that if the princess just paid him, she might eventually find a way to expose him, so he came up with a more permanent solution. He proposed that she pawn the diamonds in secret to raise the money, and then arrange for his accomplice to steal them. Poirot continued, turning to the trembling artist, "But there was a flaw in your plan, Monsieur Dupont," explaining that the princess would be perceived as a victim rather than someone who had disposed of royal jewels, because the insurance would eventually compensate the loss, and no one would ever know the diamonds had been pawned. You told Sophie the diamonds were genuine, promising her a share of their value, but you needed her to believe in the worth of her prize to ensure her cooperation. You never intended to pay her once the theft was finished and the insurance settled. You planned to disappear with both the blackmail money and the insurance compensation, leaving Sophie to face justice alone. This is insane. You can't prove anything, can you?" grinned icily. "This correspondence, which included a list of your debts and a draft letter requesting payment from the princess, was discovered in your chamber, Massy. The princess's transaction took place the day before the theft, which could only have been planned ahead of time, according to the pawnbroker's records, and Sophie has verified that you are her employer." The room exploded in gasps and whispers. George strode toward Dupont, his face darkening with rage as he said, "You dared to threaten my wife with such vile schemes." "It's true. George threatened to destroy us both. I pawned the diamonds to silence him, and then I was so frightened when the theft occurred that I thought someone had discovered what I'd done," Marina said in a thin, shaking voice that broke through the chaos. "The princess was as much a victim as everyone else," Poirot gently interrupted, thinking the theft was genuine despite the fact that it was planned by the same man who had forced her to take such drastic actions. As he held Marina's hand, George's expression softened and his voice remained steady in spite of the shock. "Why didn't you tell me, my love? We could have dealt with this together." Poirot gave a nod of approval, and the proof now speaks for itself. The button discovered close to the suite was Sophie's, torn in her hurry. The guard saw it was Sophie, moving with practiced stealth. The duplicate key discovered in the garden was made especially for this theft. And the man we chased was actually a pawn in Dupont's cunning plan. He was sent to the palace not to retrieve an envelope because there was none, but to divert our attention from the real thread of Aurette Dupont. The cunning manipulator even tricked his own agent, who was dangling before him, a task that was nothing more than an illusion. The poor soul believed his mission was real, but he was only a ruse to protect Dupont's design. "You'll answer for this treachery," George declared solemnly, his voice bearing the weight of royal power. Sophie, who had stood frightened during the revelation, was also carried away by the soldiers as Dupont's defiance broke down as they proceeded to accompany him away. Poirot leaned his head toward George as she bowed in defeat, saying, "And the diamonds, Your Highness, they may yet be redeemed from the pawnbroker, now that the truth is known." George looked at Marina and nodded, his sternness softening as he said, "We'll get them back." "Together? My dear." As the other guests started to spread their murmurs of surprise and amazement at the evening's disclosures, Marina's tears stopped, but her grin was one of relief. A load had finally been removed. I shook my head in awe of the audacity of it all. Poirot stepped back, finished his work, and the room seemed to breathe again as the last of the guests left. He turned to face me, his eyes sparkling with satisfaction. A complex web mourned me, but it unraveled beautifully once the appropriate thread was pulled. "Yes, poor to orchestrate such an elaborate deception indeed," he replied, smoothing his moustache with obvious pleasure but greed. As we got ready for the lavish supper, I couldn't help but be amazed once more by Poirot's incredible powers. Hastings makes men stupid. Mr. Dupont thought he was smart, but he underestimated the princess's bravery and Hercule Poirot's perseverance. As the chandeliers dimmed over Kensington Palace, the evening was a joyous celebration of truth's triumph over deception, with laughter and joy filling the halls. The mystery surrounding the Kent diamonds had been solved, justice had been served, and peace had been restored to the palace. A mansion of secrets is brought back into order by Hercule's genius. The bold robbery of the Kent diamonds by criminal Sophie Lauren, posing as housemaid Elise Moreau, is revealed as a part in a larger plot. But the real mastermind we hope this story has captivated you, dear readers. Monsieur Henri Dupont succumbs to Poirot's unrelenting deduction, his blackmail of Princess Marina, and his masterminding of the theft of the fake diamonds, which exposes the possibility that the real jewels pawned in desperation may yet be reclaimed, leaving the palace to recover from its night of deceit. If the mystery at Kensington Palace has captured your interest, please like and subscribe to Nocturnal Tales for future stories. Did you solve the riddle before Poirot, or did the palace's magnificence fool you? Share your opinions below.